Hi everyone, today we're going to take a look at a lens from 7Artisans. It's their full frame 9mm f5.6 rectilinear lens. And I'd like to thank 7Artisans for sending this lens out to me to review, but as always I'll give you my fair and honest opinion. So with that said, let's take a closer look. Now I've been shooting this lens on my Sony a7R5, which of course is a full frame 61 megapixel camera. And what I want to demonstrate here is how wide 9mm actually is, say, compared to a standard wide angle lens at 27mm. So I took this shot here, pretty normal, nice wide angle shot on a full frame camera, but look what 9mm looks like. It's a tremendous difference. And this is a rectilinear shot, meaning your lines are going to be straight with minimal barrel distortion. Now there's still going to be some perspective distortion, particularly towards the edges and images that are very close to the camera, but it's not like a lot of typical wide angle lenses that are usually a fisheye lens or have a ton of barrel distortion like in these shots here. So you have to really appreciate the optical design that went into this lens to be able to achieve a rectilinear image at such a wide angle. Now let's talk about some of the other optical qualities of this lens, and I think you'll be equally impressed as I was. So let's just start with the sharpness of the lens. Now I'm going to punch in 20 times or 2000% onto our tag here, and you can read every single letter and digit. And if we go down to the bottom and follow along all the way to the edge, the sharpness stays pretty consistent all the way up until the corner where you start to see a little bit of softness. Now there is some very minor barrel distortion that you really don't need to correct for, but you can. I just dialed in about a 10 on my slider here. And then there is some very minor vignetting, which is, just impossible to avoid with a super wide angle lens. But again, it's easily corrected in post-processing, as you saw there. Now, as far as ghosting and flaring goes, again, this is another area that this lens really shines. I didn't see hardly any ghosting and flaring, even with all these shots shooting directly into the sun. Now I did notice a little bit of flaring on this shot coming up next. If you look just below one of the sun stars, you can see there's a tiny bit of lens flare there. But for the most part, most of the images came like this, nice and clean with no flaring or ghosting. And then finally, let's look at coma, where it kind of looks like smearing on fine points of light. And again, I really didn't see that either. If I did, it was very minimal and nothing to worry about. So if you want to do astro or speculars, you'll be perfectly fine. So optically speaking, I think this lens is excellent. I mean, it's extremely sharp with very few problems otherwise. And really, your biggest challenges are going to be with manually focusing and then dealing with the perspective distortion of such a wide angle and anything that might be close to the lens. Now, speaking of things close to the lens, the minimum focusing distance is about 20 centimeters or about this much. So I took a picture of this piece of paper at the minimum focusing distance around here, and you can see even when you're that close, you're still capturing such a wide angle. You can just basically forget about macro. Now that said, if you need to focus on things closer than, say, 2 meters or 6 feet, you really need to use the magnify function on your camera and not the focus peaking. Focus peaking is pretty useless because everything lights up at such a wide angle. But with the magnify function, you can kind of punch in and still get that critical focus that you need. And if you want to focus on things further than 2 meters or 6 feet, just set the focus ring. It's really well marked here to just a little bit past 3 meters and shoot at f8, and everything's going to be in focus from about 2 meters out to infinity. Now, when it comes to perspective distortion, this is when things start to look stretched or elongated when they're very close to the lens and towards the edges. And sometimes it can make things look huge and weird, and other times it makes certain things in the center look really far away when they're not. So you have to learn how to shoot with this lens and learn how to compose super wide angle shots and try to use that perspective distortion creatively. So the low-hanging fruit would be sort of like your landscapes and seascapes, maybe doing some architecture. I even tried to do some like intentional camera movement or ICM. These things are kind of neat. And if there's not too much light out, you can maybe even do some long exposures of the sky. These are kind of neat. And then, of course, doing interiors and making them look much larger than they actually are. Now, to be honest, when I first got this lens, I was having a real hard time finding compositions that work because normally I'm like a 50 millimeter guy and that's what I like to shoot with. And so 9 millimeter is just crazy, right? I mean, I couldn't point that camera anywhere and get a decent shot. But I looked around online and I took some inspiration from Nick Carver because he likes to shoot these 16:7 panoramic type landscapes. And normally, what I do with a normal lens is I'll take 6 or 8 shots, process them, stitch them back together in post, and then process them again and crop it down to 16:7. With this lens, you just need to take one shot, crop it to 16:7, and process a little, and you're done. So it's really, you can get some great panoramic shots with very little work. And I did a couple like that, so you can see here. And then also, this lens has only like 5 aperture blades. So when you stop the lens down, the blades create sort of like these very sharp edges inside the lens. And what that does is it causes these very like sharp pinpoint sun stars on any kind of specular. And you can use those to great creative effect as well. And I really like how these came out with the sun stars around the lights and things. And then finally, I've been doing a lot of self portraits lately, trying to practice my lighting and things like that. But I wanted to find some wide angle portraits, and I ran across a photographer named Playdon, and I highly recommend you check out his work. He's really amazing. He does these wide angle portraits of celebrities. So I took some inspiration from some of his photos, and this one here is basically a direct copy of one of the ones that he did. And then here's a couple more that are a little more personal to me because they are self portraits after all. This is me with my favorite camera and whatnot, but I just wanted to tell you that basically once you kind of start to get used to the focal length and thinking of creative ways to use it, I think you'll be able to create some amazing images with this lens that you can't do with any other lens. And then the last couple things I'll mention is that, like all the lenses I reviewed from 7Artisans, this is very well made. It's built like a tank, all metal. The focusing ring is very smooth. You can go from like 0.2 minimum focusing distance to infinity in about a quarter turn. The aperture ring in this case is clicked, so you can click in full stops from f5.6 to f22. And finally, the front lens hood is built in and all metal, and there's a bulbous front element, so you can't screw on like any kind of ND or polarizing filters on this lens. And again, this is a full frame format 9mm rectilinear f5.6 lens, and it'll work just as well on APS-C with its crop, but it's available in Sony E mount, Nikon Z mount, Canon RF, and Leica L mount. And I'll have links down below for you to check it out. I think it retails for $479, but I can highly recommend this lens if you're looking for a super wide angle. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I hope to see you again soon.